Welcome to Eliminating Competition, the Art of Strategic Positioning. In the last lesson, we talked about choosing a niche as a way to stand apart from your generalist competitors so you can attract better clients and command higher fees. But how do you stand out from others within your niche? To do that, we're going to tackle a concept that's a little more advanced. It's actually a bit of marketing jargon, but don't be fooled by that, because it's very important to your freelancing business. I'm talking about the concept known as positioning. In case you aren't familiar with this term, positioning is basically how clients immediately perceive you in relation to your direct competitors. Now, again, positioning is extremely important, but it can be a little tricky. So I want you to remember it like this. In fact, I want you to write this down and keep it somewhere visible. The way you position yourself should answer the question, what is different about me compared to other freelancers in my niche? I'll explain this further with a story. From the time when I first chose sales writing as my niche, I would scope out my competition by searching for other sales writers about a couple of times per month. And I noticed that this type of search produced lots of the same quote-unquote usual suspects who I'd see over and over again. It was almost like a neighborhood bar, where there were a few new faces each day, but lots of regulars who showed up all the time. But the weird part was that none of these regulars seemed to be doing very well overall. Every once in a while, one of them would win a job, but it all seemed pretty random. And when they did win one, it usually wasn't for very much money, nor did any of them get much repeat business. What was going on here? Then it hit me. These other sales writers all sounded pretty much the same as one another. Sure, there were some minor differences in their titles, profiles, and in some cases, even their specialties. But that's like when you're walking through the store and see 10 different kinds of canned refried beans. The ingredients may differ slightly, but they're all basically the same thing. That's essentially what was happening here. These freelancers' basic messages and offerings were all very similar, and it was reducing them to being perceived as a commodity item, just like those cans of beans. And because clients couldn't see much of a difference between them, they didn't give too much thought to which one they hired, and they weren't willing to pay very much to whichever person they did choose. Remember our Plaza Hotel versus Holiday Inn example from earlier? Again, even the richest people won't pay much for ordinary experiences. And even clients with the largest budgets won't pay much for ordinary freelancers. Okay, so most of the freelancers I was up against did not understand the concept of positioning, how clients perceived them compared to the rest of us, or how to use that knowledge to their advantage. I knew that if I was going to really succeed, I had to make sure clients saw me as different from the others, lest I be reduced to just another can of beans, forced to compete on price, and spend most of my days hunting and pecking for new work. No thank you. So I started to study these competitors. I spent some time looking at their profiles, their portfolios, even their websites. And I noticed that they all seemed to write very aggressive, very hyped up explanations of themselves and their services. It was very salesy. To be honest, a lot of it was very much on the sleazy side. On the gut level, it was a turn-off to me when I read it. So I suspected that it might be a turn-off to some clients as well. Sure, other clients might actually like the nasty hyped-up sales writing, just like some weirdos like bacon-flavored ice cream. But, and this is a key point here, the point of using positioning to your advantage isn't to appeal to all clients. That would be mission impossible. No, the point of positioning is to appeal to some clients, but to appeal to them more strongly than your competitors. Let me give you a great example of this from outside the freelancing world, so you can start to get an even fuller understanding of it. To do that, let's take a deeper look at the fast food restaurant chain Chipotle, whose CEO I quoted in the previous lesson. Okay, now Chipotle serves burritos. That's their niche. But they also have brilliant positioning to go along with that niche. See, there are probably 50 burrito restaurants in my town, but I don't know anything about any of them. And a big reason for that is because I can't tell the difference between them. Again, I'm sure that there are minor differences, but not enough to get my attention at first glance. And when we have lots of choices, first glance is the only thing that matters. So, on the one hand, we have 50 similar burrito restaurants, all trying and failing to get my attention. They all say the same things: homemade, been in business since 1976, free delivery, blah, blah, blah. But it's nothing that's going to get the high-end customers excited. Then there's Chipotle. Unlike their competitors, Chipotle is focused on using healthy and sustainable ingredients from local farms, rather than just getting the cheapest ingredients at the lowest possible price. Their menu includes non-genetically modified vegetables, free-range chicken, and even cheese from grass-fed cows. In other words, they walk the talk, and they appeal to their tribe of primarily young, environmentally conscious consumers. Now, to illustrate the point I was trying to make in the previous slide, Chipotle knows that lots of burrito customers won't care about any of this stuff. Those customers will just go somewhere else that's cheaper. And that's okay, because the people who do care about sustainable agriculture will love Chipotle, and they'll happily pay extra to eat there. Plus, they'll keep coming back. These are big wins for the company. So this is a brilliant example of properly using positioning to essentially eliminate competitors. So, back to my story. I decided to do something a little like this with my own positioning. Remember, I didn't care about winning all the clients. That's not possible, nor could I even service more than a handful of them at a time anyway. So I just needed to win a few of them. I basically had no shot at the ones who liked the hyped up writing. That space was just too damn crowded. The best I could do there would be to sound marginally better than the other freelancers. I'd still essentially be blending in. On the other hand, if I could position myself as a sales writer who stayed away from all of the hype and fluff and icky high-pressure tactics and demonstrate class instead, then I could give myself a pretty decent size advantage. So instead of sounding aggressive and sleazy, I wrote my profile and my samples in a voice and tone that are far more professional, personal, and honest. In other words, I positioned myself as being more sophisticated in order to attract the high-quality clients, and the results were powerful. It wasn't long before I was getting more work and making more money each month than any other freelancer in my category. One of the most amazing takeaways about this lesson is that my copywriting wasn't anything special. It was good, don't get me wrong, but I certainly wasn't the best copywriter on the platform. I'd only been in the business for about 8 months at that point, and I didn't have a sexy signature style, I wasn't overly creative with words, and I didn't use any fancy tricks like neurolinguistic programming. I just wrote copy that was personal and honest, while the norm for my competitors was being gimmicky, hyperbolic, and overly aggressive. And again, I did my job well, but the key is more that I was doing something different as opposed to the fact that it was good. Quality is just a prerequisite. Of course, top clients are going to expect that. No one can do low quality work and expect to build up a great freelancing business that way. The same is true for doctors, plumbers, and any other professional. If you want to command good rates, then the fact that you do your job well needs to go without saying. But your positioning, the way you're differentiated from others in your field, that is what helps you stand apart from your direct competitors, most of whom will tend to be very poorly positioned. In fact, many of them will mistakenly think that their own quote-unquote quality work is their positioning, but you will know better. This is such an important point that I want to unpack it a bit further. Just like it's helpful to look at effective positioning from the quote-unquote real world outside of online freelancing, it's also helpful to look outside of freelancing for some of the more common positioning bloopers. Now, if you've ever seen a plumber waste precious advertising space to mention that they are licensed, bonded and insured, that's some awful positioning right there. They're basically saying, hire me because I'm not breaking the law. Or you may have seen car dealers bragging because they have a good rating with the Better Business Bureau. Again, pretty sorry positioning statement there. People expect you to have a good rating with the BBB. Then there are restaurants who say that their food tastes homemade. This is a little subtler of an example of poor positioning. The problem here is that so many restaurants say their food tastes homemade that it ends up backfiring and making them all sound the same. So, to reiterate, a good rule of thumb is that you can't position yourself by using something basic that customers already expect, since your competitors will all be doing that too. You need to find a different angle to differentiate yourself from the pack, just like I did with my non-sleazy sales writing style. Okay, now let's go over a couple of examples of good freelancer positioning. One excellent freelancer and student of this course, Ella Young, has successfully positioned herself on Upwork as a graphic designer who creates marketing materials that have modern designs. This is a great way to stand out in a crowded niche because many design clients are business people who want their companies to have a modern look and feel. And these are exactly the clients that Ella wants to pull in. Another example of good positioning would be a blog writer who incorporates copywriting techniques into her blog articles to make them more powerful. This would be a strong appeal to clients who understand and value the benefits of things like bold headlines, simple language, and strong calls to action when it comes to growing their blog and their business. And yet a third example of solid freelancer positioning would be a sales copywriter with knowledge of neuro-linguistic programming principles. Again, this certainly wouldn't appeal to all clients, but think about that client who is familiar with NLP and believes in its potential to influence and persuade readers into making purchases. When that client is evaluating 5 different sales copywriters, the one who's positioned themselves as an NLP expert is going to have a tremendous advantage. Just remember that you don't want to choose your positioning in a vacuum. It needs to be based on what your competitors are doing. And it also needs to be based on something your clients value. Because remember, positioning is about how your clients perceive you when they're evaluating you against other freelancers in your field. So it's imperative that once you choose a niche, you pay attention to what others in it are doing so that you can position yourself in an advantageous way. Remember, successful positioning is all about being different and standing out. And the good news about this is that your competitors will actually make this easy for you, because most of them will be doing the opposite of what I'm recommending. They're going to intentionally try to be similar to each other. This is a totally backwards approach, and yet as humans, we're wired to try to fit in rather than trying to stand out. This is what's known as herd mentality, and it's based on the unconscious assumption that if several other people are doing something, it must be the correct approach. This is yet another way that winning online freelancers think differently from the masses. Similar to choosing your niche, coming up with the right positioning is something that usually takes some time and experience in your market in order to get right. So again, there's no rush. Also note that it's much easier and more effective if you figure out your positioning after you've come up with a niche that works. That way, you'll be able to narrow down the field of competitors that you're studying, and you'll be able to come up with positioning that's more specific and relevant to the target market you're choosing to serve. And finally, just like with choosing a niche, you can still make money, get good reviews, and do generally well on Upwork even if you haven't yet formulated an innovative way to position yourself. As I said early on in this lesson, positioning is more of an advanced strategy, and it's definitely something you want to strive toward, but it isn't something you need to do right this second. Okay, the action steps for this lesson are simple, but remember, positioning can be a little tricky, so you may need to go through this process more than once. What I want you to do is go and look through the profiles of other Upworkers who are in your niche. Jot down what they have in common. You can use the positioning worksheet that's included in this lesson to help you. Then use the worksheet to brainstorm some potential ways to position your freelancing business to stand out from the pack. Remember that good positioning can be subtle, and you don't necessarily need to come up with anything special or brilliant in order to make it work. Thank you for watching. See you in the next lesson.